Okay, well, here we are with Paula Bailey, a computer science teacher from Reading, England. I'm Tim Maloney, and we're going to talk about how back in the 1960s at Alder High School, I was a teenage prophet. Indeed, some evangelical preachers said recently that young people can be prophets. Um, I'm not doing the Southern accent very well, but I'm not sure whether I was the kind of person he had in mind, but maybe on reflection, maybe I am after all. This was a case of a window in time where it was possible to do such a thing. Like most prophets, when we learned about prophets in religion class at this high school, it was not sufficient on the test to say, well, prophets predict the future. I mean, that's very clumsy. That'll get you a C or a C minus. But no, to please the instructor, you had to say that a prophet describes the world as it is. Now, the Old Testament prophets being, describing the world and maybe what was wrong with it, or maybe the coming age, the messianic age, as they prefer to describe it. And speaking in, after the Greek oracles, like the Greek oracles, speaking in rather opaque terms at times, hard to interpret, thus letting them off the hook if they didn't exactly predict the future, right? It was hard to interpret some of their prophecies as prophecies or true guidance for the future. But my story, not that I was intending such an elevated role at all, but it was just part of my development as a student. I think there are subjects where you have all kinds. Try to develop. We have a certain attitude toward subjects we don't like, okay, or subjects that are not quite agreeing with us, or being told to. Well, it's kind of like being told to eat your vegetables if you don't like your vegetables. Earlier we were talking about how it was reported that I very much liked my vegetables from an early age, but the subject I struggled with at times as a high school student, I didn't like, and I didn't get the highest grades in, unlike math and science, was English, and having to write essays about ideologically confining constraints there, writing things about things that I couldn't really relate to or hadn't read that much about, that I had strong feelings, but there were things that I wanted to write about. Indeed, I'd been a voracious reader of everything coming into our household, like newspapers and news magazines, and I could connect with that at times in just even connecting ideas of what I would read one month versus another month, and see how those things overlapped, and the writers, as if the writers were talking to each other, and all that. So that's where the subject becomes exciting. Now, what I hit upon in sophomore year at one point, this is 1965, is what about a story that involves people I know and see every day, and friends at school, and the school premises, and the layout of the school, and the teachers and all. What if I put all that into a story? And of course, the story that arises in the mind of a teenage boy in those days, all your friends are talking about guns and weapons, and maybe even practicing with them, or joining paramilitary, legitimate, community supported military related organizations like that. And so my thought was, I wrote this story tongue in cheek not not particularly graphic in the violence, but a bunch of boys like us with our names conspiring to run amok and blow up the school. And
I'm sure a lot of kids think that way.
yeah, and my story was, I guess, noteworthy for being pretty well written. I mean, I lost control of the story, which we'll come to in a moment, but the grammar was correct, the spelling was perfect, the mood of the story, was humorous and tongue in cheek and understatement. I mean, the British people would love it, right?
I want to read it now.
And sly humor. I would have put in more literary references if I had known them, but I was, I was a little wary of, well, this could be, discovered by a teacher, and I could be confronted about it. I was prepared to quote, or at least refer to Jonathan Swift and Mark Twain and other writers that we had read who were known for their satire and their, understatement and not being taken literally. In the case of, for example, Jonathan Swift proposing that Irish children be eaten, for as a solution to the famine and so forth. Yeah, it was satirical, and I thought it might be prudent to have things in fairly good taste, or at least aim high in terms of the writing standards. There finally was something that I wanted to write about, and and I had a outlook that recognized that if you do such things, that you, like Hitler, will have to kill yourself at the end, and that's indeed what I did.
Oh my gosh!
Well, I was just recognizing the fact of the situation, but then this was 34 years before Columbine, right? And before we had some volunteer teenagers who would have easy access to guns and do just that, and yes, they would commit suicide. So it was prophetic in that way. I was kind of hoping that it wouldn't predict the future, but one of my intentions was to point out that guns are pretty accessible, and more accessible all the time as disposable income increases.
So this piece, it wasn't a homework piece. It was a fun piece that you did.
It was a fun piece that I passed around among the students, and they liked it so much they started writing their own versions of it with more military weapons, because they knew more about the weapons and the jeeps and the howitzers and you name it, but still appreciated my sense of humor and didn't try to recapture that. Well, it got so popular that I said, well, who has it now? Come on, I need this back. And we didn't have Xerox copiers. I mean, you could go several miles away to a university or a library and pay 10 cents a copy or something to copy things, but it was a big deal to make a copy. So I just passed around the copy, and it came back to me a few times. One time it didn't come back, and I said, well, who has it? And the guy who was reading it casually mentioned the name of our English teacher, Sister Marie Urban, the one who I never could seem to write a piece that was what she was looking for. And, I mean, my grades weren't low, but, I couldn't figure out what she wanted from us. Oh, great. Okay. So I targeted her for assassination on a one-to-one basis almost in the story. And I thought, oh, well, okay, here we go with Jonathan Swift, if necessary. She'll understand.
I hope she had a sense of humor.
Well, yeah, but
I hope she had a sense.
I heard secondhand that she laughed about reading about her assassination, and was not unamused. And I never heard a thing from any teacher or authority figure about the story, and it disappeared from everything except my memory.
Oh,
But okay, so the next quarter grades come up, and what do I get in English? A little bit higher grade. Yeah, with again, not a word from the teacher. Not that I have a problem with this. I thought that was an excellent choice. I don't think she was afraid.
yes.
Okay, I was about to. Well, I was not threatening. I was a good student, the kind of student who, I've said this about other students, if you lose me, you'll lose pretty much everybody, in terms
Oh,
of being on good terms with the school. But no, I thought, I'm allowed to think that she recognized this as, well, it is pretty well written, and I don't have a problem with the style, the grammar, everything we're trying to teach, the spelling. It's not a bad piece, and it's about something I wanted to write about, and I exploited the fact that we all know the characters and we know the setting. We can visualize it. Something comes alive here with unfair advantages like knowing the setting. I had a real problem with 19th century novels that would go on and on with pages of describing this English village or something in the 19th century. Well, fine. I wish I haven't gone on a tour there that I can visualize it that well. And the words are, I'm sure, adequate, but, I wish I didn't have to do this in such a way when, a movie would be a lot easier. But that's, anyway, I digress. So that was, that was my teenage prophecy.
Yeah.
And
not one we would think of as, I mean, it's kind of a warning, really. People should have maybe picked up on it and said this could happen.
Right. Well, yeah, who's going to listen to a 15-year-old kid? And the environment was and should be quite obvious to us. But I can recall, I think probably in my early 40s, I was sitting around at lunch at a hotel at one of my conferences or something with a bunch of men that age and a little older perhaps, and I left them totally speechless. We were talking about guns and their attitudes and Western upbringing and things like that. I left them speechless for a few moments just by saying, well, okay, back in pioneer days, it was quite a commitment to buy a gun. How many days' wages did it take to own a gun back then compared to now? And that just stunned everybody, as if they had never thought about, well, a gun costs what, a few $100, pretty good gun. It's available for, how long do we have to work to make a few $100 in our high-tech jobs, huh? It's more a case of, well, you want to take responsibility for it. The carrying costs are relatively low if you just stash it away. It's not it's not like a car where you pay, licensing and registration and all that, but a lot say that it should be, so it's pretty hard to go after something that's available and cheap and low overhead. So that was, that was my prophecy, as it were. And, it was quite a good experience to, just suddenly become inflamed with this story that took place in my mind on a Friday at school. I hardly paid attention to my classes all day. And I wrote it up mostly on that following Saturday. And it was done by Sunday morning. I said, well, okay, that's off my back. Now just pass it around among my friends. We're done. And and that's what happened. So, yeah, I'd been influenced by just a colossal amount of reading and aspiring to write like some of the things I read. One example of which was, my adopted mother had a sister who never married, but she had piles of old copies of the New Yorker magazine in her apartment. And so my mom would take me over when I was off school. It would probably be in the summer, and she'd visit with her sister for a few hours, and I would amuse myself out there in the living room going through the New Yorker magazine at age 11 or so, and recognize that I thought my reading level was above my grade level, which it was, but this was tough reading. And I'd read stuff by people we'd heard about in school, like James Thurber, this Ohio guy who was a big shot at the New Yorker. And I'd try to read James Thurber in the New Yorker, his lesser known pieces, and they were not easy reading. But I just knew just enough. I could understand just enough that, I think I've stumbled across that word before. Maybe it's time to look it up. And I get enough out of it that it was challenging. And
How long until you could grasp
that's how
it?
you get yourself. That's how you talk yourself into writing this, rather edgy, horrible, ghastly story. Because people in the New Yorker are just too casual about this stuff. But in a good
think
way.
a lot of
I
think a lot of teenagers think that way anyway. So I think it has to be taken in the context of that.
Yes,
they all
and
want
they see adult role models too once in a while with tongue in cheek,
Yeah.
writing in a way that looks like pretty cool thing to do if you could do it. And then you try writing it and you say, gee, I'm not quite as good as that guy who gets published in the New Yorker yet, but I'm working on it.
How long till you could get the funny side of the New Yorker articles then, if you started reading them at 11?
Oh, well, I got the cartoons, I was really proud of myself when I'd understand the cartoons, but yeah, it depends on how deep you want to go in the satire.
Yeah.
Some of it's pretty evident to an 11-year-old, but with the cartoons, if you don't get it, you're missing something. So I'd work on the cartoons till I got it. Now, one of my favorites, I'm not sure if this was literally the New Yorker or another publication, but it's New Yorker-like, where I was kind of proud of myself for understanding a cartoon that has, two planes going by. One plane says Flying Doctor. Now, in later years, I was to actually visit the Flying Doctor terminal in Alice Springs, Australia, that's became famous by coverage in Life magazine or something. Maybe that's what inspired the cartoon. Flying doctors, to serve the outback and so forth. And so the cartoon had, plane on it says Flying Doctor. And then a second plane trailing a little bit behind said Flying Second Opinion.
That's quite big for a kid to grasp.
Well, but I'd read about second opinions in the paper too.
Yeah.
In the magazines and so on. So, okay, I'm starting to get it. A little early introduction to adulthood and that level is not bad.
Very good.
Well, if we covered enough of my talking points here, I think I pretty well did.
Well, we covered your prophetic writing anyway.
Right. And yeah, my narrative about the Cuban Missile Crisis will maybe a little prosaic. Maybe we'll leave that for another segment. But any viewers here who want to ask about my insights into the Cuban Missile Crisis while it happened are welcome to ask, and we'll make a recording of that on demand, perhaps.
on demand.
Okay, so I guess we're done for now.
Okay,
Thank you, Paula.
bye.
Bye. Well, hello, this is Tim Maloney along with Paula Bailey from Reading, England, a computer science secondary school teacher there. And this is a little overtime session, a postscript to our video about how I was a teenage prophet back in 1965 when I wrote up a humorous and satirical story about blowing up my high school when I was attending at the time, and populated with real characters, real students and teachers, and very imaginary events. Those of you who don't remember what America was like in 1965 because you weren't born yet, or maybe were living somewhere else, may need a little background explanation, or at least Paula here, whose age is quite a bit younger than mine, has assured me that a lot of folks are going to think we were perhaps a bit insensitive to what has happened since about the turn of the century in this country, at least, and even elsewhere, as far as shootings and the availability of guns and so forth. So, we meant no harm. We meant our session as a way to look at, the legacy of something that was written, by me as a youngster that turned out to be prophetic, more prophetic than I intended at the time. Although I did intend, as most earnest young high school students do, anything they write has a possible larger meaning, trying to address important issues. Well, I was to find that future issues of the day would certainly apply to taking a second look at that piece of work.
I'm having a coughing fit. Okay, well, going back to what we were trying to record. Yeah, I think we, well, I found the story really quite funny, especially because over here in the UK, I mean, it's not just a generational thing, but a cultural thing. Because in the UK, we very rarely think of, kids blowing up schools or shooting and so on. In fact, when we have to do a lockdown drill, it's a little bit of a drag. But so many kids will come and say, "Oh, I hate school," or "I hate this teacher," or I've got a particular student a minute who says, Miss, do you want me to take care of them?" And
I'm sure those jokes go around today, and
yeah, and we know that it means nothing, but it struck me that in America now, if you had written that story now as a teenager now, it might not be received as such a funny thing.
No, and it shouldn't be. And guess what? My 1965 self had read enough newspapers at the time that I would know that it was over the top and would be misinterpreted. But I'd like to point out that in 1965, these kind of incidents were so beyond the pale that it was in the same class as Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal back in the, 18th century, about how the Irish famine could be solved by eating Irish children. He didn't mean it either.
Yeah.
but there was a satirical point to be made. So yeah, I would, it would not go over well now, and shouldn't. I was thinking mostly about Hitler and the necessity of killing yourself after you do all this damage, and who wants that, right? Yeah, it was true. It was popular among teenage boys in the early to mid 60s, and probably before and certainly after. They would read everything about Hitler they could get their hands on, just for the amusement of it, just for the entertainment of knowing that, well, this was the government. If you were German in the 1930s, and you could, sign up for military service and get to be part of it, which is quite a thought, even now, and certainly for teenage boys in the 60s.
Mm,
It doesn't mean they were in favor of,
no.
it means they were highly entertained by reading that history and highly interested in
Mm.
what the human spirit is possible. I mean, what the human spirit is capable of, the kind of evil and so on. So,
In some ways, you had said that the sort of writing was a little bit, you wanted to provoke thought. How did you
yes.
feel when Columbine happened?
Well, that certainly would make that kind of a piece by a high school student get him a little extra attention that should not be the kind of attention that he wanted. I mean, you're signing yourself up for counseling if you put out a piece like that. In
Oh,
my
yeah.
case, as I pointed out, I was not only not counseled, but the teacher laughed it off and evidently thought it was a pretty good piece of writing.
Well, yeah, it was imaginative. It's sad in some ways that now, because of what's happened, certainly in America, the kids would all be very hesitant to write down their feelings like that. But as I said, a lot of children do have those feelings. They don't necessarily mean anything by it. They'll just say these things that.
Yeah.
But a
Well,
moment when you were an adult and you saw Columbine and those sort of things, how did you feel? Because you had wanted to provoke thought on the
that
issue.
was 1999, and by that time I was, about 40 years old. Um,
Did you
and
remember that you'd written about it?
pardon me?
Did you remember that you had written that
Oh, of course
story?
I did.
Oh.
I'd been 15 at the time. It's hard to not remember uh, things that happened, but sure. Well, yeah, I think even before Columbine, things were getting rather tense as far as gun control and gun violence. It didn't break out overnight for a school shooting, but I did think that, well, okay, there were two guys who really did want to commit suicide, and after they take out a bunch of classmates, and I certainly thought that was ridiculous for most people, including myself. But I never could have guaranteed it would be, 100%. You have to have some culture of hope in this
Mm,
country in order to make sure those things don't happen at all. Because if you're starting to crank out substantial number of kids who just don't care enough about their lives at that age, late high school age, and just as soon take out a bunch of classmates and go down, then that's really bad. Now, the fact that it's happened and happened repeatedly, that's just like, the 9/11 terrorists. Well, okay, world records have been set. Now, do you want to break that world record or just forget about it and say, oh yeah, we used to do that, but that got out of style. I hope all this stuff goes out of style.
yeah.
We
Yeah.
declare, that we've learned something and we know better now.
Well,
So, yeah, we live and learn.
we hope so.
Okay.
Hope so.
Well, anything else you want to say in the postscript?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Well, you're a good teacher and you help your kids keep a good sense of humor about things. I'm sure there's plenty of more satire to write about high school than going after easy targets like attention-getting tales of conspiracy and mayhem.
Mm. The kids
The
have
next
to have an
generation
outlet.
can be. I mean, they can write more subtle, comedies of manners,
Mm.
about mating rituals and the prom and things that I've written about, right?
Love Island. Lots on Love Island. Yeah.
Okay,
But
well, I guess we can pause here then.
mm.
Yeah, bye.